Welcome back to the channel. This is Punched. This is a channel about war games, and on the table we have certain components from Armored Knights Case Blue, their Dawn Bend game. This is by Grognard Simulations. This video is going to talk about air. As many of the air rules as I can provide details for. So I have an agenda. So we're going to talk about the counters used in the game, scenario cards, airfield cards, such as these cards right here, scenario card right here. Obviously we have a selection of counters. Also we have I propose a simplified card that may be of some use, maybe not. I'll have a link at some point down in the description below to download that card. It comes as a Word file. I may try and do it as a PDF as well. We'll talk about fatigue, both how air units accumulate fatigue and how they recover fatigue and what fatigue stands for in the first case. We'll talk about the primary air missions, which are close air support and ground attack, and the procedure for doing both of those. We will talk about combat multipliers, and then we'll get into potential simplifications. For example, this air unit availability tracker is a much more simplified version of these airfield cards. They serve much the same purpose, although there's a whole lot more nuance here and so on. We're also going to talk about the terms air sector and air zone, and these cards are all about air sectors, whereas the simplified availability tracker has nothing to do with air sectors, and we'll get into that. There are pros and cons with either approach. So this is going to be a lengthy video. The description below will have segment links in it so that you can jump around to the things that you're most interested in. Hope you enjoy it, and well, it's an air video, right? So buckle up and put your seat back tables in the upright position, and we'll continue on in the next segment. Well, let's talk about counters. The counters that you need to be familiar with in order to conduct air operations in Dawn Bend and the Armored Knights Case Blue system. First, you have your air counters. These are air units. They are intended to be roughly half a squadron of planes. And we see a representative sample of some. They are color-coded by nationality. And so we have, let's talk about the Germans first, because they all, I think most gamers are more familiar with the German marks of aircraft than they are with the Soviets. So we have a Ju-87 here. The things to note on the counter itself, we can do that. So the things to note about the counter itself are that it has the aircraft type, the historical aircraft unit, a Luftwaffe unit that it belongs to. In this case, I believe this is what? One Sturmgeschwader 2, something like that. The B indicates that this is a bombing unit, and 12 is the number of combat factors that it brings to bear. Now, all the air counters are double-sided, so the reverse shows a step loss, and it shows the adjusted combat factors. Okay, something to be aware of. So we have Ju-87s. I will leave it as an, we'll zoom a bit. We can do that. We can do that for y'all. Right, Ju-87s, Heinkel 111s, and HS-123s. That's an old pre-war aircraft that nonetheless is still continued to be used for ground attack and close air support missions. There are a few other German types as well. Now, one thing I'm not showing, you'll notice that here we all have bombers, right? Bomber, bomber, bomber. The Soviets show a PE-2, which is some kind of, I believe it's a medium bomber. An R-5, which is a night bomber, or NB, and a U-2, which is a night bomber as well. We don't show any fighters here. right? And there aren't any transport aircraft represented. For Don Ben transport aircraft, you have a couple of Ju-52s, and the rules are present for them to conduct airdrop missions. And you can certainly utilize them if you like. In fact, when we get into the scenario card, you'll see that you do have a couple of those Ju-52s. But they're not really addressed much, and it's the sort of thing that you can get away with not utilizing them if you don't really want to. So over here on the side, we've got a couple of ground units that are relevant. We have a light anti-aircraft unit. That's this symbol here. And then the colored in dark symbol is a heavy anti-aircraft unit. This is a company of 88 millimeter guns. I will note this value right here. Let's see if we can do this. There we go. The yellow 6 on a green background, that is an armor quality rating. That indicates that this is a dual use sort of unit. It can also operate in an anti-tank mode. And of course it's 88s. They are dual purpose guns. So the light anti-aircraft, as you can see, and this is not unique to the Soviets. The Germans are the same way. They do not have an armor quality rating on them. They can't really be used in an anti-tank mode. However, they are useful in combat because they put out quite a volume of fire, and they are useful in a direct fire mode against non-armored targets. So that's it for counters. So next we're going to talk about scenario cards. So let's talk about scenario cards in the context of air operations. This is the scenario card for the main Paulus attacks scenario. This is the largest scenario in the game. It makes use of practically every operational unit in the counter mix. And there's quite a lot of information here on this card. It's a pretty large piece of paper. It's an 11 by 17. I've talked about these in other circumstances, and on the back of it you can see the tactical dispositions and some appropriate setup information for the various ground units. So for air is done a little bit differently. So let's focus in on air. Maybe a touch back. There we go. Very well. Okay. I think we've got everything in the necessary focus. So I will point out that as compact as the information is on these cards, a relatively small font, a lot of words and so on, they are almost always in the same format. So you will always find Air Forces down here towards the bottom of the card. All right. Oh, and before you go into shock over me drawing, annotating, and so on these cards, this is actually a photocopy. So I photocopied it onto the appropriate large piece of paper so that I can do these annotations and leave the original cards intact. So, okay, scenario card. These talk about the available air forces, and they talk about their initial fatigue state. So looking here on all the cards, they're laid out pretty much the same way. Different quantities of units, but laid out the same way. Right here is a fatigue indicator, right? And it shows that some units will start off with 0 fatigue. Some units will start off with 4 fatigue. Now I'm going to talk about fatigue here in 1 or 2 segments. And so just suffice it to say, this represents aircrew fatigue, wear and tear on the aircraft themselves, and so on. And a higher fatigue number means that the aircraft is less available. Okay, so a fatigue 4, for example, means that the aircraft can't fly at all. But that is the initial setup that we arrive at here, and they're just indicating that, okay, these units that have fatigue 4 were probably flying and engaging in heavy air operations the day before. So, okay, something to know about these. I've made these pencil marks so you can see them here and here, and I've done that to provide some indication of what kinds of aircraft we have in these listings. The listings are always the same. If there are fighter aircraft, they are on the left side. So these are all fighter aircraft, and they're only used for the air supremacy battle. They are not used for any other thing in Don Bend, in the Armor Knights Case Blue rule set. Then the units to the right are bombers. These are the ones that you care about the most, let's say, because those provide support to your ground troops. I've also marked that we have a couple of night bombing units, and they have, if you utilize night bombers at night one, only night bombers can really go and bomb at night. And they also stand a much better chance of getting through adverse air superiority conditions. And so I've marked those here. You can see on the German side we have fighters, and then we have bombers. Now, transport aircraft are always all the way on the right. The Ju-52s are always going to show up over here. Note this ME-109G, okay? The G stands for ground attack, and actually I believe the counters are so marked as well. These are not air superiority. They cannot be used that way. They are used as fighter bombers, and purely as fighter bombers. Whereas the ME-109s over here, separate counters, and they cannot be used as fighter bombers, but only as fighters. All right. Also note, for this particular scenario, there's a couple of asterisks here, and they're just talking about the availability of these aircraft. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is going to be airfield cards. And there's some relevance here, but I'll come back to it. I'm going to talk about the airfield cards first, and then we'll get into some of these scribbles that I pointed out here. One of the nice play aids that comes with Don Bend are a couple of, they're untitled, but they're basically air unit availability tracking cards is what I would call them, or air unit fatigue cards, I suppose. So what we're looking at here is the German version of those cards. Notice it has a gray background. And so the various parts of this card are as follows. Each one of these groups, so one here, a group here, here, there, etc., right? Each one of these groups represents an airfield, okay? And it represents, you can have aircraft on that airfield. So aircraft that are available for flying and aircraft that have either flown or are no longer available at all, right? So once you get to fatigue 3, your aircraft are done for the day. So suppose that your aircraft all start off at fatigue 0, then as you fly them and they accumulate fatigue, you move them from, okay, we've flown a mission, and then we come to another turn the same day, and we can fly. Basically, when we go to the next turn, we pop back up to available, and we can fly another mission, and so on, until we've accumulated enough fatigue. Generally speaking, you can do as many as 3 missions. So fatigue 0, fly a mission, that's the first mission. Accumulate 1 fatigue if everything works out right. Second mission, accumulate another fatigue if everything works out right. And then a third mission puts you somewhere in here. So no more than 3 missions per day. Additional information shown here is the identity of the airfield. So this is Morosovskaya number 3. It is it's a level 2 airfield. Okay, so it has a higher capacity, it has better facilities, and so on. E6S defines the air sector where this is located. Okay, Echo 6S. So let's talk about air zones. Let's zoom in on this thing, if we will. This map right here is a representation of the tactical map, the area in blue represents the actual tactical maps in the game. Areas in brown or gray are off-map areas. These might be published, or hopefully will be published at some point, as a follow-on title to the game series. But each one of these, so for example, Echo 6, hopefully that comes out on video. I can just make it out. That's Echo 6. This area right here, this rectangular area, is an entire map. It's a standard, 34 by 22 map, okay? An air sector is half of that, okay? So this is an air sector, Echo 6 North. This is an air sector. This is Echo 6 South. So when we're talking about, for example, Morozovskaya 3, located in Echo 6 South, it's in this air sector. Now, for all intents and purposes in the game, except for one exception, which I will detail, you only have to think about air sectors. You do not have to think about the towns. Okay, the towns, they're useful to kind of visualize things, but they, for the most part, do not have any bearing on the rules of the game. Okay, there are die roll modifiers that apply. Sorry, not a die roll modifier, a combat factor multiplier. If you are running a close air support or a ground attack mission to an adjacent air sector from where you take off, you can add 50%. You multiply your air factors by 50%. Okay, what is an adjacent air sector? Oh, I'm glad you asked. So an adjacent air sector are all of the surrounding sectors for the sector that you're originating from. So that means the sides and up and down, and also diagonals, okay? So for example, what is particularly relevant here is Echo 6 South. Any airfield on Echo is adjacent to any airfield on Echo 6 is adjacent to any airfield on Echo 7. Sorry, any terrain on Echo 7, if that makes sense. Let me restate that. That was a bit tongue-tied. Echo 6 South is adjacent to Echo 7 North and South, okay? Echo 6 North is adjacent to Echo 7 North and South because of the diagonal. So just something to be aware of. If you have an air base that is further back than being adjacent, you get no combat multipliers. They do operate at full strength. There's no problem there. So just something to be aware of. Additionally, other pieces of information, it talks about the supply. And the supply for all of these air bases here on the German side is Army. In other words, if there are any supply point considerations, for example, running those Ju-52s to do an airdrop mission to drop supply points to a surrounded, pocketed formation of troops, you would draw from Army supply. This also has implications in terms of modifiers for fatigue recovery if you're playing with the full rule set. And we'll get into that. So what are all these other things here? Well, we see the map numbers, right? And we see towns. And I will point out the German map has all the relevant towns. So Tatsinskaya, right, is, let's see, right there. Bokovskaya is right there, and we have an airfield for it right there. Kamensk, right there. So all of the towns, right, Krasnodon, not there, but I think it's just for reference. So anyway, all the towns are referenced here, and that's nice. The Soviet does not have the same thing. They only list Kalach and Stalingrad. Now, as I said before, it's not that big a deal because when you're actually thinking about these air sectors, it doesn't matter where the town is located within that air sector, okay? So it's not that big a deal. These two stars, I'm not quite sure what the stars are. They might be railheads. They might not be. I shall inquire. Okay, numbers. There's a whole lot of numbers here, right? There's a rail network here, and there's a whole lot of numbers associated with this. Those are actually rail hex counts. They have nothing to do with air, but quite a bit to do with supply. As the Germans are moving forward, they are re-gauging the railroads, and so they can get their supply railheads closer to the front and therefore alleviate some of the supply problems they have. But for air, none of this stuff applies, just so you know. Oh, I have taken the liberty of putting the airfield capacity in terms of number of units. You can look it up in a chart, but I'd rather have it here on the card, so I've gone ahead and penciled it in. So the level 2 units can handle 12 aircraft. The level 1 units can handle 6 aircraft. Okay, so that's the airfield cards. I will go back. I said I was going to talk about some scribbles I've made here. So an interesting thing is this, as far as I know, this is the main scenario, right? It's the big scenario for Don Bend. Okay. And it should have all the aircraft units, as far as I know. So I counted them up. And for the Germans, for example, there are 30 units. And there are only, if you take out the fighters, and we'll come around to that later, if you don't count the fighters, because they only really show up once a day for the air supremacy battle, then you have 22 aircraft units available to the Germans. Interesting thing is that for Don Bend, these cards represent a lot of airfields that you will never have to use. So for those 30 air units, or 22 ground attack, if you will, we've got at Morosovskaya, something like that, right over here, we have 3 level 2 airfields, total capacity 36 air units. We never have to use any of the others. Morosovskaya 1, 2, and 3, they're all right here. They're all adjacent. They're all as close as they're going to get to the battlefield, really. And so you never have to use any of the other ones if you don't want to. There are rules that say, okay, if you have few aircraft at a base, you do get some improvements to your fatigue recovery roll. Presumably that means that you have more people, perhaps, to do the work, and things are a little less cluttered, and your maintenance crews can spend more time with the airframes. That seems fairly reasonable, and that's why you might want to disperse out your aircraft a little bit further. But just so you know, the Soviets, by the way, they're in the same situation. They have a grand total of 33 units. Again, 22 without fighters. All right. Also, this is unauthorized. It's unofficial, but it can be fairly convenient. If you don't want to go to the trouble of tracking your aircraft by airfield, and just simply want to get on with the ground battle, I found that I needed an air availability tracker for the Armored Knights Guderian Crosses the Meuse River game. It didn't come with one, so I whipped one up, not knowing that, of course, we were going to have these convenient and informative cards in Don Bend. But I found that if I'm not playing with quite all the rules, if I want to simplify the rules, this actually works out fairly well, because I can put all of my units in one pot and then move them along as I need to, right? So just something to be aware of. I'll put a link to this file. Certainly it's available for Guderian Crosses the Meuse. You would probably want to use this card for that title. And to the extent that you might want to play with the Case Blue or Guderian rules in the earlier Armored Knights titles as well, I think this card would be a fairly useful thing. Okay, a brief word on air zones. So there's been considerable confusion used at the term air zone, just as there has been with the term air sector. Now, if you recall, in the last segment, I believe I discussed that every half map, right, like a north half map or a south half map, is an air sector, right? So when we talk about air sector ranges for aircraft, for example, we're talking 1, 2, 3 air sectors, that sort of thing. So as you can see, I've laid out some rulers here and a pencil to indicate what I understand to be the dimensions, including some off-map stuff down here, the half maps down here. This is the Stalingrad air zone, okay? Air zones are larger collections of map area, and as I understand it, I've seen the map, but I don't have permission at this time to make that available. I'll add a segment here if necessary and show it, or I'll do a post on it. But my understanding is that for Armored Knights Case Blue, there are 6 air sectors. Stalingrad, which we're looking at here, which in fact has Stalingrad and goes all the way back to E6, the 6 row, D6, E6, F6, and so on. There is a Rostov air zone, which is located over here and goes significantly south along the Don River all the way down in that direction to Rostov. North of here, there is a Voronezh air zone to the north. There is a Crimea air zone, which covers games in that area. And then there are 2 air zones in the Caucasus, down near Maikop and Grozny and the Caucasus Mountains. And so that's what air zones are. When we're talking about, bear with me, when we're talking about the air mission success table, right, we are talking about whatever degree of air superiority is present in an air zone. And of course, I'll briefly touch on the fighter air combat table and other things that go into determining at every start of day interphase per air zone what the air superiority is for that air zone. So the short answer for Don Bend is in a single air zone. So all of your various fighter aircraft. Let's see, where did I stash those beasties? Ah, yes, right here. All the various fighter aircraft go into that air superiority fight. Okay, and really that's all I have to say about air zones. We're going to talk about a ground attack air combat. It's a pretty simple process. We've got our units that we're attacking, 1 hex. We've got our air units. Now, I've got a stack of Ju-87s here, and I've got a stack of Heinkel's HE-111s, and I got an HS-123 in there, just what I happen to have queued up at this airfield. First thing, the Stukas fly alone. They don't mix it up with other aircraft types, so that's something to be aware of when you are putting together a ground attack or a close air support package, if you will. So let's take our Stukas. We got 3 Stukas. The process is simple. So first off, you're going to do a roll on the air mission success table. And for all intents and purposes, you're most likely to be on the Luftwaffe air superiority column that we see right here. It's the Luftwaffe air superiority column, which means that for the Luftwaffe, you're having a pretty decent day, right? As long as you don't roll a 1 or a 2, you've got no problems. Even if you roll a 2, you just gain an extra fatigue, okay? The abort, as we saw, is going to cause you to abort the flight, and you incur an extra fatigue in the process. So let's just assume that for the heck of it that we're for the heck of it, let's have a let's see, we'll take 1 fatigue, so we'll do a fly F, and that means that we're going to wind up with one of these units over here, there, and the other 2 units will be simply flown with a single fatigue. Okay, so that's how you might go about doing this. Additionally, one trick that Robert Wiebe, the game designer, showed me was you might want to rotate your counters such, and that'll indicate, I believe, the counters that have actually flown. Later in the game, you're going to have a mix of counters in a given hex that are, suppose that we come to the next turn and we wind up taking a fatigue 2. Well, if I've got him right here, if I just do a fatigue 2 with this guy, this Heinkel has flown a mission and received fatigue 2. This other counter has not flown a mission yet, so who's flown and who hasn't? And that's what the moving the counter over to one side can indicate for you. So who's flown a mission in the current turn. Once you've completed your turn, of course, rotate them all back facing upright. So, okay, all of our Stukas are flying. The next thing to be aware of is that we have a light anti-aircraft gun present within the hex. And so here's the flak summary table. You have to do a roll on it. It's light anti-aircraft, and so you just take a hit on a 10. Right, so 10% chance most of your flights are going to get through. Now realize you can wind up in situations where you have quite a large amount of anti-aircraft in the area, and so everybody who's within range, which for light anti-aircraft is 0 to 1 hexes, so conceivably, you know, everybody in this mega hex could have a go at any aircraft coming into this area. So if you're able to concentrate your light anti-aircraft, or for that matter, your heavy, you can put up quite the barrier to air attack. For your heavy anti-aircraft, I don't believe the Soviets have any, but the Germans do have quite a bit. That's actually going to be a roll of 9 or 10. Also, the range is longer with the heavy anti-aircraft guns. So just something to be aware of. All right, so we're just going to go and say, okay, there's been no problems with the flak this time. Okay, let's see. Oh, by the way, just be aware that a hit would abort a unit and add a fatigue. Right, so we would go from here to here, for example, or from here to here, in the event that the light anti-aircraft was successful in chasing off the aircraft. All right, let's see. So we have done our air mission success. We have done our flak. By the way, this goes a lot faster, particularly if you're the Luftwaffe. You know, you're just doing a series of die rolls, and if you don't roll, if you roll a 2, you have to pay attention to it. If you roll a 1, you have to pay attention. But 80% of the time, your mission is going to fly undeterred. Also, there's not an overabundance of flak in the game, so a good amount of time you will not be dealing with the flak summary chart. Okay, so let's get into the meat of things here. The next thing to look at is the artillery or air target density modifier table. This basically says, hey, if you have a lot of units in the hex, that is density. If you have a higher density, then your attacks are going to do more damage potentially, okay? It basically gives you a multiplier. For the more units that you have in a hex, these are steps of soft, what they call soft stacking points. That is to say, non-armor stacking points. If you have more in the hex, then you get to multiply your combat factors. If you have fewer in the hex, then you multiply them, but not in a direction that you would like. So this table, by the way, is also used for artillery. So that's why that's why you see the attacker here as well, so that defending artillery can have a potential multiplier against attackers. So in this case, let's take a look. We have an infantry unit and a light anti-aircraft gun. They are both considered to be soft stacking points. Neither is armor. Neither one of the units is armor. That's a 5. and that's going to give you a ×1 multiplier, pretty much nothing much done. So pretty inconsequential. Then you simply figure out your odds ratio. We have, let's see, we have 36 points here, and we have 20. Do we have 20? No, we don't have 20. We have, let's see, we have 15. So we have 36 to 15, and that's going to give us a 2-to-1 ratio. So, no, sorry. It's not 15, sorry. So you would think that you're going to use your combat factors, which is a normal thing for ground combat, right? So this is 15 combat factors. However, when you are doing ground attacks, it's different. There is a specific basis. So when you are flying Stukas, your hex counts for 16 factors, if you will. They're not really combat factors, but you basically will divide 16 into your Stukas. So we wind up with a 2-to-1 attack anyway. If we were doing any other aircraft aside from Stukas, then we wind up with a 20, okay? But in any event, we have 36 divided by 16. That's going to give us a 2-to-1 attack, and that's it. No other, I think terrain modifiers, terrain modifiers will apply, but most of your terrain is going to the majority of your terrain is not going to have a modifier. So we're on the steppe, we're in the clear, there are no problems here. If we were in a nice village, then we would get a -1 to the attacker, to the combat DRM, right? So we'd get a die roll modifier of -1. Now, there are other terrain types as well, and so looking at the terrain effects chart, we're looking at the combat DRMs here, and we see that we're in clear, right? But if we happen to have the village in play, this level of zoom, let's zoom out. Right, so for the village, we'll get a -1. For a town or city, it's surprising that we get a 0 for a town, but -2 for a city, I guess. And then, of course, hedgehogs will give you benefits as well in the different terrain types. So, but for the most part, we're going to wind up here on the steppes, and so nothing much going on, right? So back to our original hex, and that's basically it. Okay, then we have combat results. Let's talk about combat results for a second. So here's the typical key for combat results. So do be aware that your 1 hex retreat and your route are ignored, okay? Your 2 hex retreat, capital R, that is going to give you a suppression. Okay, you put a suppression counter on it, and suppressed units give you die roll modifiers in negative directions, the directions you don't want them to be. So that's something to be aware of. And the suppression counter will come up after the owning player's next deliberate attack phase. So, that's it. Suppose that we get an R result. That's it. If you take a step loss, you take a step loss as normal, okay? That is rather lengthy, rather wordy, but that's what that's what we wind up with here. Okay. Here's an example of a close air support mission, if you will, for aircraft. We're going to do the same setup as before, and we'll assume that we have Stukas in play, that we have one of them is flying with, gets a fly fatigue on the air mission success table, and that the available light anti-aircraft did not chase off any of the planes. So we're doing a deliberate attack here, which means that we get to use all 3 aircraft. If we were doing a hasty attack, we could only use 1 aircraft instead of 3. So it's your deliberate attacks that will get to use 3 aircraft in a mission for close air support. Okay, really what happens here is much of the same process happens. You have your air mission success table, you have your flak, you look at the air target density modifier table that we talked about before. Okay, let's assume that we've gone through all of that, we're just dealing with 36 factors of Stukas coming in. Well, the 36 factors get added on to the combat. The ground combat is otherwise, in this case, we're dealing with a total of 32 factors. So 16 and another 4 is 20, and we double the armor because they are attacking into clear terrain. So a grand total of 32, right? Now, in this case, because it is ground combat, we are in fact using the defending combat factors to compute our odds ratio. So we are dealing with a 15 here. So 15 to 32, but we add the 36 on top. So grand total for the Germans is 68. That's going to give us 4 to 1. Let's see, 68, 15. That's going to give us 4.5 to 1, I believe. Odds. The coffee has not taken effect yet, so let's see, 68 divided by 15 equals, yeah, okay. Awake enough to do videos, not quite awake enough to do math. Cheers. Okay, we continue. So 4.5 to 1 odds. Note that even if we were doing something, I don't know, silly, right? Like, I'm going to have my 88 millimeters attack. What on earth am I doing having these guys attack? But consider 4 factors versus 15 on the ground, right? Attacking into an entire battalion of troops with light anti-aircraft. That is not a recipe for success, but add in the 36 factors on the Stukas, and now we're at 40 to 15, and all of a sudden we're at a 2.5 to 1 odds attack, okay? That's where your air can be a real combat multiplier in this game. It can let you do things that you probably really ought to not be doing. Of course, the air is it's a limited resource, and there are all kinds of alternative uses for air. Do you attack here? Do you attack there? That sort of thing. So all kinds of trade-offs that you have to make. But we're going to go with our primary scenario here, 4.5 to 1. Now, interesting thing, when you are doing combined arms attacks, right? So I have my, minimum two steps of infantry, and in this case, the battalion gives me 4 steps. So, per the chart, I can get +1 per Stuka in a combined arms attack. And every category has a +2 limit, so I can get, even though I have 3 Stukas, I get a total of +2 die roll modifier. So that's kind of a nice little bonus. Now, if I were using anything other than Stukas, I would not get that combined arms bonus. What's up with the Stukas then? The Stukas have the +1 per unit die roll modifier bonus for combined arms attacks, and they also get a 16 basis instead of a 20 basis when they're doing a ground attack mission. Well, the idea is that a Stuka is a dedicated dive bomber, okay, and they are actually fairly accurate, and the literature says that these aircraft, these units, were very effective and very accurate again. So that's why they get the different treatment. At the cost, of course, of they fly alone, right? So you can't just have a couple of Heinkels and throw in a Stuka to get a +1 modifier, or throw in the Stuka to get the 16 basis for a ground attack mission. So it doesn't work that way. Anyway, that's what we have here for close air support. Otherwise, aside from the fact that the close air support simply adds into the factors on the ground combat and can have the modifier for Stukas that we talked about, that's basically it. All the other things that happen, the fatigue, the air mission success table, the potential for flak, those all happen the same way as they do for ground attack missions. There are a couple of multipliers that can apply in the event of air attack. This is applicable both for close air support and also for ground attack missions. Let's see. So let's take a look at the non-terrain combat modifiers table. And my thumb here is noting or pointing them out. There is a same air sector or less than 15 hex range multiplier, and it's a _2 multiplier. So if you are very close to the air base, you get that ×2 multiplier. Additionally, these do not stack, they are one or the other. But if you happen to be in an adjacent air sector, then you will multiply your combat factors by 1.5. So what's the deal behind that? Well, I guess the deal is that you're able to trade away, because you are close to your airfield, you are able to trade away fuel for ordnance. That's how I understand the rule to be applicable. And so the closer you get, so within 15 hexes, you get even more ordnance, right? Because you're just making a quick hop, engage the target, drop the ordnance, and come back to base. So it turns out that for the Soviets, at least, for the Germans in Don Bend are never going to have, they will never have the same air sector, because they are attacking, they are moving, let's see, here's the Germans. They are moving forward from their effective base of operations. The blue area here, these shaded hexes, that's the area of operations. And the furthest airfields forward for the Germans are here in Echo 6 North and Echo 6 South. And it's denoted here on the cards. You can see Echo 6 South and North. Here you go, South, South, and so on. And then here's your Echo 6 North airfield. The town names are not, they're not generally important for the Germans, because, I mean, if the Soviets are attacking and you're falling back upon those airfields, which obviously when we get into Operation Uranus, these areas will be very much in play. But for Don Bend, it's the Germans doing the attacking. They are moving to the east, and so they will never be in the same air sector or within 15 hexes of any of their air bases. So nothing to worry about there. For the Soviets, quite a different picture. And actually, in preparing this video, it was quite the surprise to me. I thought that Kalach was the only town that had jumped out at me as having an air base on it that would be close to where the fighting is happening. It turns out that there are two others. I've marked them. We have the town of, I'm going to botch this horribly, but bear with me. Ilarianovsky, right here. And then we have Peskovatka. So they both have level 1 airfields. By the way, another discovery I made, I was looking for counters to note this for the video, and it turns out that the counter mix has these 3 counters on it, and I'd wondered what they were, and it occurred to me these are airfield counters, both for the level 1 and level 2 airfields. The campaign rules do allow for construction of airstrips and airfields. The rules are not actually in the rule book. I think that they will be added in later on, though if you do look at the construction summary, you can build a level 1 airstrip or a level 2 airbase if you are willing to spend the time and the cost in supply points. You also have to have construction engineer battalions, which there might be one in the counter mix. That would be an engineer type that would be an engineer type that is marked with a C for construction. I don't know that we have one. I know that we have bridging battalions, bridge repair battalions, but I don't know that we have those. In any event, for all intents and purposes, assume that that's not actually going to be happening. The Soviets don't have them in their countermix at all, but we do have these 3 airfields that are in play. So they are in the same sector, right? This is, well, hopefully you can see the, it may be a bit hard to make out, but this is the dividing line between Echo 8 South, which is the southern part here, and then Echo 8 North. So this is in a different air sector than what's going on over here. These 2 are in the same air sector. So it gets rather interesting. So for example, any air emissions going in here would get the ×2 multiplier coming from Kalach or, gotta try it again, Illarionovsky. Darn. Illarionovsky. So air emissions going to this hex would be comfortably, bear with me, I'll get my ruler out, handy dandy ruler. So we're set for 15, and we have the radius here. So radius 15, very, very quick and easy to find that out. We are actually 10 hexes away from Illarionovsky. I'll get it right one of these days. And very close to Kalach. So just something to be aware of. Now, the interesting thing is that we are actually within 15 hexes of Peskovatka. So we're within 15 hexes of Peskovatka too, even though they are in a different air sector. We would get that ×2 multiplier. So if the combat were 1 hex further away, let's see that that works. Yeah, 1 hex further away, and we would wind up with just the ×1.5 multiplier. That's just where things break out. So you'll want to keep something something handy like this. I've made a couple of custom kind of slide rule. They're based on a slide rule 3D print design, but I've simply marked them appropriately for hexes in the game. Let's see. Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and so on hexes. And of course, you could slide it all the way out and get 20. And you can also, I hadn't quite considered this initially, but you can daisy chain them, right? So that you could have multiple slide rules together and go even longer. Or of course, you could simply do the math and use a conventional ruler. Would work perfectly fine, but you'd have to know the distance. You could use a ruler, or you could use a tape measure. Those would work equally well, I think. But this is dedicated, and it's set up to exactly have the proper dimensions of the hex, which, by the way, is I believe it's roughly, it's not precisely, but roughly 19 millimeters seems to work as a hex dimension here. So this is also useful for radio communication when you want to do a radio, a comm trace. You can just simply put in the appropriate distance and do it. Because comm traces do not worry about the hex grid. When you're doing a supply trace, you do have to worry about the hex grid. You have to trace along the hex grid, and so you can't just do a simple radius as the crow flies. Radio works that way, supplies don't, as far as the game is concerned. That was a question that another answer that I got from the game designers. So, by the way, let me do a quick shout out for the Consim World Expo. I have my Grognard Simulations Expo 2025 casualty tokens here, or rounding tokens rather, for the game. Those were available to all the people who participated at Consim World this year, which was a very nice little gift from the game designers. But it's an opportunity to sit down with the game designers and really get some quality time with them, ask a lot of questions. I was bombarding them with questions, and we'll eventually, a lot of those answers will make it into an FAQ, I think, at some point. Okay, so that concludes, let's go down scenario, the agenda here. We already talked about missions and the combat procedures. We've just talked about the multipliers. Yeah, there we go. We talked about multipliers, and we'll wrap this up shortly. In this last segment, I'm going to talk about some potential simplifications you can make to the air operations in Arbor Knight's Case Blue, particularly in Don Bend. And I'll talk about simplifications you can make and when you might not want to make those simplifications. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the air-to-air combat. There is a rule for it. It is, I believe, Air Superiority Missions 11.3. And there's a detailed process for performing those missions, as well as the appropriate fighter air combat table. So what's going on here is that you're going to get your fighter aircraft, the opponent's going to get their fighter aircraft. As far as Don Bend is concerned, there'll be talk about air zones, right? And I think I mentioned earlier, for Don Bend, all of Don Bend is in a single air zone that is effectively the Stalingrad air zone. So it includes the Don Bend maps, and it also includes areas to the east covering the Stalingrad area of operations. But for Don Bend, everything's in a single air zone. So you take all your fighters, your opponent can take all his fighters, and you go through that process in 11.3, and you use the fighter air combat table. This happens during the start of day interphase, and it's called out in the sequence of play. Now, this is unofficial and unauthorized, but in my opinion, you could probably just go with a simplification of saying, we're going to have Luftwaffe air superiority all the time, right? So ultimately, what you wind up doing is your fighter combat goes through a series of rounds, and you wind up with who holds the field in the air, so to speak. And you figure out what the ratio of aircraft is. And then for the rest of the day, right, for the rest of the day until the next start of day interphase, you will wind up with one of these columns on air superiority. Historically speaking, the Germans had air superiority throughout pretty much the entire time frame of the Don Bend game. We're only talking here about a few days period, and I think that's a reasonable simplification to make, that you just run everything off the Luftwaffe air superiority. Here's an example of a 2-day scenario, for example, and that is actually called out as a simplification. German air superiority is in effect for all air operations for the entire scenario. You skip the air superiority battle during the start of day interphase that's in play. Now, the other scenarios in Don Bend do have fighter aircraft, and the implication is that you will. Let's see, here we go. The implication is that you will be conducting these air superiority battles. Now, it's not stated, I think. I don't know that it's stated, but I think the assumption is that you always start with German air superiority anyway. That's a question that I will find out the answer to, and I'll post in the description notes when I have the answer to it. So, but I think that you can make a reasonable simplification. If you look at the available fighter aircraft, the correlation of forces, as they say, is I think is fairly well tilted in the direction of the Germans. It's really just going to be, it's going to depend, right? This takes me into the next thing that you may may wish to skip or not. It really just depends. If you want to get into, if you really want to get into it, you can. And the thing that I'm talking about is doing airstrikes on air bases, right? Not putting your combat aircraft, not putting your aircraft towards ground attack missions or close assault CAS missions, rather. But yeah, close air support missions. Instead of using them for CAS or for ground attack, you actually fly them against opponent airfields. And there are rules for that in the book as well. And let me come over here. Yeah, okay. It's part of the ground attack missions in 11.5. There is a separate section in there for it, I think. Huh. That's interesting. Hold on. Let me keep going. Air bases. Okay. Yep. Right, 11.9. And second paragraph, an airbase can be attacked by a ground attack mission. And it talks about that sort of thing. So if you're going to play with the air superiority rules, then chances are fairly good you may wish to consider playing with ground attack missions against your opponent air bases. Maybe. I mean, in the game that I played so far, I played the tank cemetery scenario. That's the small starter scenario. There are no fighter aircraft. There is no air superiority going on. It's just all Luftwaffe air superiority the entire time. And I just decided that given the nature of the conflict, that I wouldn't bother with what do you call it, with attacking airfields. You may wish to, you may not wish to. Certainly in the context of a larger campaign game, when you have a lot more aircraft available, I think that that would probably be a desirable thing. Okay, if you're playing with airfields, right, and with attacks against airfields, then you can take damage against airfields as well, which degrades their ability to repair fatigue or to restore fatigue. So these are damage against airfields that we're looking at right here for the level 1 and level 2 airfields that are available in Don Bend. And as you can see, you get increasingly bad die roll modifiers in the event that you're taking damage that have an effect on the ability to recover fatigue. So if you attack the airstrips and you do damage to them, then that's going to make your opponent's aircraft less available. So it can have something of a cumulative effect. Additionally, I think there are rules for repairing. Let's see. It is not there, but I believe 11.9 probably has something going on with it. Yeah, okay. During the start of day interphase, airbase hits can be repaired. There is an airbase repair table. Oh, really? You don't say. Yeah. Okay. Airbase characteristics and repair table, and you can do repairs, and that will repair the number of hits. Now, the interesting thing is construction, which we have here. You get base flak, which is interesting. If you're doing air attacks on bases, they have some inherent flak units available, so 1 light anti-aircraft or 2 for the level 1 airstrips and level 2 airfields in the game. If you 50% may be applied to hard hits. Okay. There are rules about that in the game. If you do hard hits, then you have to expend supply. So that's kind of interesting. But there's a lot of detail, a lot of nuance in there, and if you want to play it, you can. If you don't want to play it, I think that's fine too. I mean, the focus of the game, after all, is on ground combat, and this is more of a, think of it as the the opposing air forces duking it out by launching airstrikes on the opposing airfields, that does have an effect. I mean, that can actually have a marked effect on ground, a notable effect on ground operations if you're able to take out the close-in airfields and significantly degrade their performance. So there's that. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on in there. The more I think about it, the more I think that, yeah, you probably want to play with these cards, right? Now, I had spoken, I think, in a previous segment of a simplified card that I'd come up with for Guderian Crosses the Meuse. You could play with this as a simplification, okay? But if you do that, then you're going to lose this nuance here, which says, hey, I get multipliers for being close to the action. Or even further away, if you were adjacent, say in Delta 9 South is adjacent to this area of the map, again, you would get that effectiveness multiplier at 1.5 factors. So these are all things to be aware of. I noticed that there are Echo 9 South is not in play. Those are off map. Echo 10 South is off map as well. So we're only really talking about a handful of airfields. Let's see, Delta 8 South. We have the map for that one. So Ilovinskaya is Delta 8 South. That is up here. I'm going to say that it's probably north of the Don Bend. Doesn't have to be. But it's in this particular air sector. That would be another airfield that you really want to pay attention to. So, yeah, it's a question of trade-offs. By the time the Germans get over here, in this area, in the actual Don Bend area itself that we can see here on the map, this is of course the Don River. Let me get this guy off screen here. So this is of course the Don River, and we are looking at here's the town of Kalach, and moving up toward this area here. And so there's going to be a fair amount of action over here. So I think you would probably want to play with it. But note that the Germans, by the time you get over here, the Germans are getting no modifiers. Their closest air bases are not really in play. Ironically, if you're playing the entire battle, that does give you enough time to construct a level 1 airstrip a little bit closer in, if only you could find the rules for it. So, there are rules about capturing air bases. There's talk about combat engineers can purposely inflict damage on air bases, so you're trying to destroy it, to deny it to the enemy. Let's see, because an airbase can be captured and then used the next day, you can do a PAT. Looking it up in the rules, that's a planned air transfer mission. Right, and it takes a full day. The air unit may not fly the rest of the day, but you can start flying the next day. So if the Germans happen to take over Kalach, for example, then you can only fly a PAT on the 0400 turns. So the odds are pretty good. The Germans are going to fly the next day at 0400. You put in some German air units. Let's say we'll fly into the air base. That does it for the rest of the day. Then the following day, right? So 2 days, is that right? About 2 days after you capture the air base, effectively, you can begin air operations out of it. So that could actually be useful. That is in the rules. Note that if we're dealing with Soviets, by the way, these air counters, they don't actually wind up here. Okay, I'm just using this for illustration, but suppose that the Germans were threatening, right? So on the turn that the Germans capture Kalach, you can do what's called an emergency air transfer. And that just says, hey, let's get the heck out of Dodge and go somewhere else. There's a die roll involved. It's part of the 11.7.1 stuff. So this has turned into a very long segment. Didn't mean to do it, but there's such a range of rules here in the game. Such a lot. There's quite a bit going on here in the game, and you could simplify it down. Not worry about the air-to-air. Not worry about air bases. Use the simplified air unit availability tracker. Not worry about all the different die roll modifiers, right? All the different die roll modifiers related to air bases versus air strips, related to your headquarters trace level and so on, which, by the way, for all intents and purposes in Don Ben, it's always going to be a -2 modifier, right? You could almost, if you were ignoring airstrips, you could almost modify this table and shift the numbers down for -2 for Don Bend and use a single table, not worrying about air base capacity and so on. You could do a lot of simplifications and get this down to roughly where it was, I think, where the fatigue recovery table is for Guderian Crosses the Meuse, and simplify it. You could do that. The question is whether you want to or not. If you are playing with enough of the rest of the rules, then chances are you're going to be hopefully patient enough to use all the nuance in this area as well. And I encourage you to try that. I leave it as an exercise for the as I say, for the patient viewer, to actually try, air missions against the air bases and playing with the different airstrip versus air base, with possibly even constructing an air base. I think that would be interesting to do. So that'll work. Hopefully, you could probably play with using one of the bridging engineering units in the countermix as a construction battalion instead. That would probably work. Oh, I did not cover air transport missions, okay? Right, there are JU-52s in the countermix. They're only really authorized to do ADM, that's airdrop missions, okay? And you can use this table and the procedure that's in the Section 11 rules. Let me call out the, 11.6, air transport airdrop. So the difference between the two, airdrop is pretty straightforward, right? Kick it out the hatch with the parachute attached, and airdrop supplies to the troops. Air transfer is you fly into a local airfield and conduct it that way. And I will point out that it's a lot less chancy. You're going to lose a lot of supplies in an airdrop potentially, whereas you probably will not lose them going to doing an air transfer mission. However, air transfer missions are not really in scope. They're not really in scope in the Don Ben game per se. Most of the action is going to be on the west side, to the west of this area. So it's relatively unlikely that the Soviets, for example, would find themselves surrounded in the Kalach area, where they would have these on-map airstrips available for an air transport mission. So the Germans, on the other hand, the Germans do actually find themselves surrounded. Actually, the Soviets do find themselves surrounded, go that way. Ironically, no transport aircraft are provided for the Soviets, so they can't engage in ADM anyway. So the only players, the last word in airdrop missions in Don Bend is the Luftwaffe, and they can do it at one point. I believe it's 14th Panzer Corps. The tank cemetery scenario, for example, which is taking place along a confrontation line roughly here, that represents surrounded units, but they've abstracted out the supply and the airdrop missions in that case, so you don't have to mess with them. But there are larger scenarios that could, and most likely will, involve 14th Panzer Corps or other German units getting into trouble. And so you could airdrop in those cases. So simplifications, right? And this is turning into a 20-minute segment on how to simplify things. So let me just do one last little wrap up. I'm repeating myself here, but hopefully. So air-to-air, the air superiority, you could do without. Attacks on airfields, you could do without. Repairing airfields, building airfields, right? Tracking the different units on different airfields, you could do without that as well. However, for the Germans early on, you will get some benefits. For the Soviets, the whole time you will get some benefits. I think you probably ought to use this this chart, but if you're just determined to do it, you could use something like this, cobble it together. All right. Well, that's it. That represents simplifications in a very not so simple segment. In this segment, I'm going to talk about some simplifications that can be made to the various air rules in the game to reduce the amount of overhead, the amount of tracking that you have to do, and to reduce the complexity and hopefully to speed up at least certain aspects of play. So, got my agenda here. We're going to start off talking about air superiority. So, right now, air superiority is performed during the start of day interphase, and it involves a certain amount of die rolling and tracking, and it has a fighter-to-fighter combat sort of thing. It has its own table, a couple of tables actually. So it takes up time. You only have to do it once every 6 turns, but still, one of the things I think that has been discussed a bit offline, as it were, is an air superiority simplification. And I don't know that the die rolls are quite right, but the proportions are correct with what's being discussed as I understand it. So for air superiority, instead of doing the existing process, right, which involves lining up the fighters against each other and doing successive rounds of fighter combat and then finding out what you wind up with and determining the superiority level as a result of it. Instead, you could simply roll a single D10, and 80% of the time you'll get a Luftwaffe air superiority. 20% of the time you'll get Luftwaffe total air superiority. So that's it's a reasonable simplification. This would apply only to Don Bend. It does not apply, I think, to any of the follow-on games necessarily. And there'll be some, I think there'll be guidance on this simplification coming out at some point, or some simplification that's like it. Additionally, I think that the level of air superiority, how it's contested rather, is going to change over time. I know that certainly when you get into Operation Uranus and the encirclement of 6th Army, you wind up with a situation in which there's much more parity in the air superiority. There may be a simplification table at that point in time. I don't know. But it will probably be worth your while to keep your counters, to know what the rules are for fighter air combat. But for Don Bend, I think you could get away with doing this and probably not too far off the mark. Okay, fatigue tracking. Let's talk about fatigue tracking. So right now in the game system, we have the charts, and we have a certain complexity to them. All right, so we have charts that are like this. We have a similar chart for the Soviets, and it is necessary. Here, I'll switch back over to the German. So, for example, you need to know this gives you an approximate location on the air sector map. Here's Yep. Let's come on back and let's go Rashash. Yeah, way the heck back there. All right, so for example, this JU87 counter is here and is adjacent to the early, the E7, the Echo 7 map, the air sectors on that map. So you get a bonus to its combat points, whereas if you had to base a Heinkel, or any aircraft for that matter, back here in Rosage, I believe, hopefully, you get no bonuses at all. So additionally, because of the way that aircraft ranges are set up, it's not too horrible. There is an air unit characteristic chart that talks about a range in air sector. And it also talks about 1-turn and 2-turn missions. So for example, if you were forced for some reason to base a JU-87 further back from the front, why would that happen? Well, it could be that one of the airfields gets damaged to the point where it can't accommodate planes, if you're playing with those rules. So if we were, let's see, if we were in Rashash, for example, a JU-87 only has a range of 3 air sectors, and you can only make one of those moves diagonally. So 1, 2, 3, you couldn't range to this area from Rashash with a JU-87. You could do, as it points out here, you could do a 2-turn mission, which means that you take off and perform the mission on 1 turn and then return to base on the 2nd turn. And that would give you a range of 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4. You could just make it and then return on the 2nd turn, which is really going to cut down your operational tempo. So a lot of nuance, right, in the available rules with these things. Realistically, though, with the number of aircraft that you have, the entire aircraft counter mix, I believe, is around, if I recall correctly, bombers only. If you leave fighters out of it, it's 22 for each side. And these level 2 airfields in the Morozovskaya, which I believe is this is an inconsistency or a typo or something like that. I think these are the same location because there's nothing else around here that talks about that. You could base, you only need two of these 3 air bases, right? These 2, for example, and you can be adjacent to Echo 7 and certainly range into the Echo 8 map. So just something to be aware of. The Soviets have the same thing going on, but I think their air bases might be closer, potentially, and they might have more air bases. So the simplification, though, is to use this alternate air unit availability tracker. I will post it up at some point online with the link in the description. This is something I've used successfully in Armored Knights Guderian Crosses the Meuse. And in that case, my counters back here. In that case, we are looking at something along the lines of starting off the game, if you will, or the turn. And then as you fly, they move that way, they come back to ready, and you can fly them again, and so on. So much more simpler. However, that's the pro. The pro is simplicity, right? However, the con is that you lose the ability to account for air sectors, and you lose the ability to account for the combat modifiers to the factors on the aircraft units that would apply. So that's what you have to think about. From a play balance perspective, the Germans only get a 1.5 modifier on the Echo 7 map. Once you get into combat operations on the Echo 8 map, they no longer get that multiplier, but the Soviets will. So it depends. Early scenarios, early turns will favor, if you're using this map, it favors the Germans. If you're not using these air bases, I think it will favor the Soviets a little bit. That's actually a useful play balance consideration as well. But that is your call to make. All right. Fatigue recovery. Right, okay. So fatigue recovery has a wealth, right? Fatigue recovery. This entire area is using fatigue recovery, okay? And so you have to take into account the supply level, which gives you a die roll modifier, which in Don Bend is always going to be front or army, so it's always -2. That's convenient to know. You also have to take into effect that level 1 airstrips and level 2 airstrips get different modifiers as well. You can take temperature out of it. During Don Bend, it's all above freezing levels. It's all above 35 Fahrenheit. No big deal. However, you do get die roll modifiers for capacity. Again, that is a place where, if you like the nuance, that's where the Germans have something of advantage. They have more level 2 airfields that are in range. So the Soviets, I think, only have a single. Yeah, there you go. Looking around, they only have a single level 2 airfield, and it's on Echo 10 South. Right, so it is away from the battlefield and provides no modifiers. It does provide a slight advantage, perhaps. It gives you higher aircraft capacity. I would think that you probably don't wind up using that airfield anyway in this game. You'll definitely use it later on to mean other games. So the simplification here would be only use the basic fatigue recovery table, right? Don't worry if you're, okay, hold on. Let's bring it back in. So in conjunction with using the air unit availability tracker, you're not worried about airfields, so they're off the table. You're not worried about airfield capacities, they're off the table. And so you can simply use the fatigue recovery table with a -2 for each side. So simplification there, and that would be it. All right. Continuing on. Something to be aware of. It's not obvious. It may not be obvious, but there are useful detailed rules for air transfer missions. That is a supply mission using an aircraft capable of carrying supplies, which are these aircraft here. The HE-111 can be used in that mode, Ju-88 bomber, and of course the Ju-52, which is a dedicated transport aircraft. They can all carry supply points. The intention behind the rules here, let me come back over here. So the intention is to provide the rules for the airlift into Stalingrad, right? The Luftwaffe, in the person of Hermann Göring and I believe his chief of staff, famously promised to fully support the Sixth Army in the encirclement in Stalingrad by air. Didn't really live up to the promise, but this gives you the opportunity to try it out. However, in this game, at least at the start, there are no airfields on map that you can deliver supplies to for the Germans. I don't think there are any for the Soviets either. So ATM is pretty much out of bounds for Don Bend. Now ADM, the Soviets, one of the scenarios has a Soviet group encircled. I don't think the Soviets, let me see. Nope. The Soviet units do not have an ATM-ADM supply capacity. So that's out. But the Germans do, and they were known to do significant airdrop mission, to provide significant airdrop mission support, to provide fuel and other things to the ground troops. So just be aware that this is something that can happen. You have the aircraft units, you can use them, but be aware that ATM, not a thing in Don Bend. Remember, these are Don Bend only, I would say. At least only for now. And that's the only game we have. It's the only game in town, as they say. So just be aware of that. All right. So another thing, facility air attack table. So I've only played a few games of this so far. I played the Tank Cemetery, and I played the what do you call it? I played the Stalingrad playtest, and in neither game were any airfield attacks conducted with air units. You can do it. There are rules for it. Here are part of the rules. Here are the repair rules as well that talk about repairing. You can do it, but I think it's something that can be left out of the game, particularly in the smaller scenarios. The focus is going to be on the ground combat anyway, and so perhaps better off using your available air assets rather to just attack ground targets. So close air support, ground attack missions only. So just something to be aware of. If you have no attacks on airfields, one, you're not diverting the effort. You don't have to. One, if you are doing attacks on airfields, you have to be playing with these charts, okay? You can't use the air unit availability tracker because it makes no sense. Part of the point to doing attacks against the air units is you need to know how many air sectors, because it's further away than your regular unit targets. So you may wind up doing longer missions. So the multi-turn, the 2-turn missions may come into effect. Additionally, then you have the size of the airfields, level 1 versus level 2. You have the capacities of those airfields, and so on. If you like it, use it, right? The rules are there. They do add a significant amount of nuance on the game, and I would, as a personal note, I would be very interested in seeing somebody give that a shot. Interesting thought experiment. Not so much thought experiment, but I would propose play the game where all you play is air attacks and see what happens. In fact, you could probably play the game with your full air superiority to see what's going on there, your full fatigue tracking, right, with your charts, with your aircraft dispersed out to the various airfields and so on, and give yourself. You could either go 100%, all the aircraft that you have available, and do these airstrip airfield attacks, and see what happens. Does it actually produce a significant effect? Typically, the effects are going to be along the lines of, as you have more damage, you're going to get higher modifiers, right, that will push out your fatigue recovery. So you have fewer and fewer aircraft available as your air bases take damage. The other thing that you wind up with is that if you damage an airfield sufficiently and you want to move aircraft around from one airfield to another, you have to do what's called a planned air transfer mission. That's in the rules, and you're welcome to give that a shot too, but it takes your aircraft out of service for 2 days, actually. So 1 or 2 days. Check the rules. All right, so that's about it for simplifications, and of course the flip side, which is maybe you want to play with this stuff. One last thing. Let's bring in a couple of characters here. The Germans have 1 C engineering battalion. It's assigned to 6th Army. Well, what do C engineering battalions do? Well, they construct things, but specifically airfields. Okay? There are rules in here for constructing airfields. Now, there are not any rules in the rule book. However, they have the construction summary rules which tell you what you need, which is you have to build a level 1 airstrip. You need 2 supply points, 3 days, and a construction engineering battalion, certain terrain requirements, and so on. You can upgrade that to, with 8 points and 12 days, you can upgrade it to a level 2 airbase. Now, you don't really have, I don't think you really have the 3 days to get the level 1 airstrip plus the next 12 days. That's 15 days. I don't think Don Ben runs that fast, but you could do 3 days, once you get clear of some of the terrain here in Echo 7, once you push the Soviets back far enough, you can come into Echo 7 anywhere on the Echo 7 map, right? So up against the west side of things in a protected place, take your 3 days, take your 2 supply points, and get yourself an airstrip. And then you can base 6 air units on it and get better multipliers, particularly when you're going from air missions originating on Echo 7 going over to Echo 8. You will get that 1.5 times multiplier. Useful thing. All right. And that is my agenda for this segment. Hopefully you'll get some good stuff out of it, and we'll see how that goes. We'll wrap up next. Well, that's a wrap. I thought it was going to be much simpler to talk about this stuff, but there is a wealth of rules and tables and procedures and whatnot going on with the air missions. Hopefully you get some good out of this. I would like to thank all of the counters appearing in this film on both sides, as well as the informational counters. They played a role too. Take a bow, guys. Yeah, there you go. All right. All playing out, of course, on this land, which we will call this land. Blatant reference. So we talked about counters. We talked about the scenario cards. Let's see, the air stuff on the scenario cards. We talked about this badly needs a name, the Airfield air sector map chart table card thing. Airfield cards. Showed an alternative simplified card. We talked about how to accumulate and recover fatigue, the various air missions that are available, the procedure for doing those air missions. We further talked about multipliers, which the various, the 2 combat factor multipliers based off of proximity to the fight, the distance from the airfield to the fight. Those worked out very well. And finally, we talked, the most complex segment, I think, was the simplification segment. Isn't that funny how, isn't that ironic, rather? So we also provided the definitions of air zone and air sector, which is to say that each of these squares, right, that I'm putting my thumb on, these are each air sectors, right? The entirety of the Don Bend map, all maps put together, that is one air zone as far as the game is concerned. So that's it. I hope you liked the video. In the notes below, I will try and put out the timestamp links so that you can skip around, not to the subsections, but skip around to the main sections, and if you need to come back to it for reference. So as always, any mistakes are my own. Any mistakes in this video are not due to Grognard Simulations. Hope you liked it. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and we'll see you down the road.